recall, the State Department was beginning to turn over to this committee my emails because they had between 90 and 95% of all my work-related emails in the State Department system.
But, ma'am, they met with your attorney, and your attorney that they met with happened to be Cheryl Mills, which was your chief of staff.
That's correct. That's correct.
Now, is that weird that your attorney was your chief of staff? So that attorney-client privilege may have kicked in there somewhere?
She was my counsel before she was my chief of staff. She became my counsel again after she was my chief of staff.
Well, I know that when the email went out that night, it called everybody undersecretary, director, spokesman, and it said Miss Mills was counselor. It didn't say chief of staff. And that was the night of the attack. But let me just go a little bit further. You said that you found out in October, but your attorneys met with the State Department, I believe it was in August. Now, from that time, you said you turned over everything and that your lawyers went through this. And I believe it was in November, after finding out in October, that they had reviewed all these emails. Now, the State Department hadn't been able to give us all those emails in 2 years, but your attorneys, you must have some of the fastest reading attorneys in the world to go through that. And I know you've got a group of them there sitting behind you, but how many attorneys does it take to go through 65,000 emails in 2 months?
Well, first of all, the process to provide information to the Congress with respect to Benghazi started before I left the State Department. There was a concerted effort to gather up any information that might be responsive.
Did you tell them you had a private server at that time?
You know, I know that...
well, if they were gathering emails, you had to tell them that you had a private server when you were there.
The server is not the point, it's the account. And I made it a practice to send emails that were work-related to people on their government accounts. In fact, you know, Secretary Kerry was the first Secretary of State to rely primarily on a government account. So
I'm not talking about the account, I'm talking about the server. But one last point, I'll close with this and then the chairman can give you time to answer. Let me tell you what I thought. I think that your attorney sat down with the State Department and they said, we got a problem. And so we got to come up with something that this is not just the secretary having these emails in a private server. So I tell you what, let's do. Let's go back and ask Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State in 1997, that never even had an email account. Or let's go back and ask, you know, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and me to provide all this information. I'm just telling you, it doesn't smell right, and so I yield back.
Well, if I could respond, I think in the course of trying to answer and archive information, the State Department determined that they did have gaps in their record keeping, and it was much more than about me. They had gaps with respect to others, both other secretaries and others within the State Department. And the technology in the State Department, indeed throughout our entire government, is notoriously difficult and often unreliable. And I think it was the State Department's efforts to try to fill some of those gaps. So I didn't know at the time that there had been such a meeting. I learned of it subsequently. And when I received a copy of the letter that was sent by the State Department to me and the other 3 preceding secretaries of state, I immediately said, well, let's help them fill the gaps, even though I believed that the vast majority of my emails were already in their system. And we did. We conducted the investigation, the survey that I have described to you, and turned over more than 30,000 work-related emails, 55,000 pages to the State Department. 90 to 95% were already there. We sent so many that some were going to be returned because they were clearly not work-related. We did our best. I did my best to make sure that if there were gaps in record keeping, at least my materials would be there to help fill any gaps above and beyond the 90 to 95% of emails that were already in the system.
Well, I'm not an attorney, but I think Ms. Mills is a good attorney.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman. At this late hour, I insist that 4 minutes after regular 10-minute time should be cut off with questioning.